Good evening, everyone. I see Miss Tyers.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I had to switch machines. My desktop said, no video for you today. So I said I'd come in here and come to my laptop and just be able to see all my favorite people. They're all here. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
And thank you all for coming. I wanted so badly to call Gib and ask him to chair this meeting, but I resisted. So we have HPD's Catherine Taveras here to let us know what's going to happen with the RFP scoping. And I want to thank all of the HPD team for doing this. And I want to hope that the RFP gives the potential respondents guidance on the zoning that the community is seeking. So let's take it away, Miss Catherine.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Taveras, and I'm here representing HPD. There's a few of my colleagues who will be joining tonight, including Paris Strotter, possibly Lynn Zeng, and I see Addison Botters and Sushma Pramod here as well. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for joining tonight. You to feedback that we've heard so far about the Bergen and Dean projects. The goal of this meeting is to share what we've heard during community engagement and share the results thus far of our survey and our past meetings. We're still in the process of collecting feedback, so these are not the final results, and you should feel free to give us your feedback on the information we're sharing today, either through the chat or by continuing to email us or leaving voicemails. I promise I am listening on the other end. So before we go into these findings, we're going to start off with a brief recap of the sites, the project goals, and the community engagement strategy. And we'll talk about residential, non-residential design fact that we've heard and next steps before we open it up for questions. So a quick recap on the sites. These two sites are located in your neighborhood. I'm sure you are all well acquainted. So the address is 516 Bergen Street and 542 Dean Street. The Bergen Street site is a vacant HPD site with parking, and the Dean Street site is an underutilized full parking lot. Both sites are roughly 17,000 square feet. And there is a seniors first commitment on these sites to develop 80 to 100 senior units, which is why HPD is proposing to do so on the Dean Street. And we are also trying to relocate the parking and storage field operations for HPD onto the Bergen site. So with these commitments and conditions and site restraints, we were able to develop a list of project goals. The first being to address minority-owned businesses, participation in affordable housing development industry, which is why this is an MWBE RFP, where the lead applicant from the development team will need to be an MWBE certified enterprise. The second is to develop a feasible and efficient affordable senior housing project to meet that commitment that for the seniors first. Third is to further fair housing goals of providing New Yorkers an opportunity to live here. So we were looking for specifically extremely low, very low, low and moderate income households, since that is feedback that we have heard continuously, who are in need of affordable housing. Fourth is to provide space for community facility uses that address your needs. Fifth is to expand the open space on the Dean Street site. And sixth is to relocate the HPD parking and storage onto the Bergen site, because those are operations still need to house in order to serve the Brooklyn area. So with those goals in mind, we wanted to come to the community with this process of engagement And we had a few goals that guided us here as well. So first, it was to inform community members about these projects, about their key factors and conditions, and figure out how to best address community needs. Second, we wanted to gather nuanced feedback about your vision for the sites and the housing needs of the greater community. Third is to deepen our understanding of the impacts of COVID and how these projects could help mitigate or address those sort of impacts in the future. And fourth is to draft a community visioning report that takes into account the feedback that we heard so that we're able to effectively communicate this to developers as they respond to the RFP. So our outreach during this community engagement process has been done through a series of different things. So first, public meetings. We kicked off on October 21st. We also briefed B8 here very, this should sound familiar, land use and housing committees on November 10th. We hosted an urban design workshop on November 17th. And most recently, earlier this week, we did a North Prospect Heights Association meeting on Monday. We gathered comments through a series of methods. So on our website, we had an interactive map where people could let us know a little bit more about the sites, but also about the broader neighborhood. Happy to say that that map was visited quite a bit. And we did see, at last count, I believe 97 comments. And we haven't closed the map, so that is still open for people to go and comment. We also received numerous emails with people letting us know about their feedback in a general way. So we heard about populations that they wanted to see served, building design principles that they wanted to adhere to, proposals about how to do this differently, and general comments about the needs of the neighborhood and the area. And lastly, we also had a phone number for the project. And so we had people calling in and leaving us voicemails where, again, we heard a little bit more about what people wanted to see. And for our surveys, we have an online survey that is still open and will remain open for another week. And at the time when this presentation was put together, we had received a little over 100. Checking just a few minutes ago, we have received even more responses since then. So we anticipate to continue receiving responses until we close the survey. Now, also note that we are working with community partners to get physical surveys into the hands of those who are not connected virtually. Okay, so for the feedback that we have received so far, and I'll repeat, this is thus far, these are not final results. But so far, we're seeing a lead here in various incomes as household incomes that people want to be prioritized on the 516 Bergen Street site, which is open for programming. Here, I'll note that we asked respondents to select their top 2 choices. So we're seeing a lot of preference here for very low income, and extremely low income. We also asked folks to weigh in on whether they would like to see rental housing, which serves that very low, and extremely low household band, and weigh that against home ownership, where we may see moderate income served a little bit more because we don't want to place such high household costs on very low and extremely low populations. So here we're seeing a little bit of tension. As I just mentioned, we saw a preference for serving households in those lower income bands, but here we're seeing 60% of respondents respond that they want to see home ownership. And this is changing quite a bit as we receive more responses. But just wanted to know that there is attention in that. And then just to wrap up on the residential program at the Bergen Street site, we asked in a general way what priorities people had for the site. And I was able to tease out the two themes here of populations and uses that people wanted to see. So we saw a lot about homeless households and serving that population. A lot of call outs as well for survivors of domestic abuse and violence, and a lot of calls for working family households. In terms of uses, people also wanted to see community gathering spaces, supportive services for seniors and homeless populations, and open space. We also asked respondents to weigh in on non-residential programs, both for the this first one is about the retail and commercial uses that they would want to see on the Bergen site. And so here we see that grocery store, bakery, sit down and cafe restaurants, and fitness centers are at the top. I will note that we had about 17 respondents at the time when this analysis was done that let us know that there is enough commercial here in the area. So I will note that that was not an option there, but people did let us know that they wanted to see no more. So thank you for that feedback. Second, we asked about the community facility spaces, which could help address community spaces and services. And so at the Dean Street site, we saw a call for arts and cultural center, recreation and community center, and after-school centers. For the Dean site, where we are proposing to house the senior population, we saw the top three emerge as, again, arts and culture center, recreation and community center, and what's different here is the health and wellness center ended up in the top three. At the Dean Street site, we're also looking to expand the open space. So we asked community members to weigh in on what kind of passive recreation they would want to see. This was an interesting one. We saw about a third of respondents say that they wanted to see flower beds, trees, and gardens. Our next highest up was interactive spaces, so places where people can meet at 25%. And then after that, we saw this population of other, which encompasses a list of things that are sort of opposed to each other, but came in at maybe just 2 to 3 people calling out these themes. So we heard calls for parking, and we heard calls for no parking, calls for dog runs, other calls for no dog runs, playground space, and community garden. And for building design, we asked folks what they would want to see if the building could be 9 stories, which would allow us to achieve all of the project goals that I discussed a little earlier, and is typical of HPD projects. So it's important to note that these aren't the only options. Developers can get really creative when it comes to designing a building to achieve project goals. However, due to the size of the sites, it could be difficult to achieve short and narrow buildings, as is seen in the surrounding context. So we presented these two options to demonstrate trade-offs, making the buildings more in context. So the first option was designed with a lower height on the street to blend in with the heights of the surrounding building, and presented potential for a larger terrace or communal space. The trade-off here is in having the lower height on the street. The front of the building may not have a narrow face, such as the other surrounding buildings. The second option was designed to break up the face of the building to look similar to surrounding buildings, and creates the space for potential multiple and separate terraces. And the trade-off here is that the building height is kept tall on the street to fit in as many homes as the other design because the building face is broken up. We also gave folks the option of other, where they can write in specifically what they wanted us to know in terms of their priorities here. And so our results show that 39% of respondents preferred the face of the building being broken up, that option of possible multiple terraces, and a slightly taller building height along the street. 29% preferred the lower building height along the street with that larger communal possibility there. A quarter of respondents told us that they wanted to see smaller or shorter buildings than the ones that we had shown, or something within current zoning. And 7% said that they wanted larger or taller buildings to accommodate even more housing. However, we know that these are not definitive answers and that there's more nuance to the conversation. Which is why we hosted an urban design workshop where participants could speak more in depth about their priorities. Participants were placed in a breakout room of approximately 10 people, and this included a facilitator, a whiteboard navigator, and a note taker. And they were guided through a series of questions and shown sketches from our survey, the ones that I just mentioned. And so we were able to capture a little bit better that there were more opinions, that there's many opinions. Sometimes they oppose each other, and that there's a lot of questions and concerns about the building form as it relates to the street, the playground, the historic district, other neighbors, and overall neighborhood. So at the workshop, we also asked participants to weigh in on styles and materials and got a range of responses here as well. Some themes here were that the style should look older and respect the historic district. No drastic changes when it comes to adjacent buildings. And we also heard some calls for transparency and big windows, but no glass curtain or mirror effects. So these are some pictures out of our mural boards. So for Dean, we also asked folks what they wanted to see in terms of building design. And so here again, we showed 9 stories, which would allow us to achieve the project goals and is typical of the HPD projects. And so these are not the only options for designing the building. We just wanted to show what the trade-offs here were, especially with the allocation of open space. So much like the Bergen site, it's difficult to achieve short and narrow styles here while still accommodating the number of units that are needed for that commitment. So we presented 2 options here. The first option was designed with the lower height on the street to blend in with the heights of the surrounding buildings. And here we could see a possible large terrace or communal space again. And the trade-off is in having a lower height in the street, the front of the building may not look as narrow or very similar to the surrounding buildings. The second option was designed to break up the face of the building to look more similar to the surrounding buildings and create the potential for multiple and separate terraces or communal spaces. The trade-off here is that the building height is kept taller on the street to fit in as many homes because we're breaking up the building. Again, we also gave the option for folks to let us know in other what they wanted to see here. And our results show that there was almost an even split between the 2 options that we presented. So 35% for option A and 34% for option B. And again, another quarter of respondents let us know that they wanted to see smaller or shorter buildings or something within the current zoning. And 6% said that they wanted to see taller buildings to accommodate more housing. Okay. So at our workshop, it was pretty similar here again to the Bergen Street example that I just showed. And so Here again, we had very similar feedback of many opinions, many of those opinions opposing each other, and a lot of concerns about the building form as it relates specifically to the playground. So questions around shading, reflection, setting back from the playground, and the sounds. And some questions and concerns about the overall context with the neighborhood. Here, we also heard a few ideas of how the building should be designed with seniors in mind. So designing the building to fit in amenities like seniors sitting outside. When it came to styles and materials, we heard about the importance of off-street drop-off, ensuring light and air, some calls for context through material selection, matching window heights with adjacent buildings, some calls for creativity, and again, a rejection of mirrors or glass. So we, as I mentioned, there were a lot of opinions. And so for our community visioning report, we do want to address that. Well, not address it. We do want to acknowledge that. So even though there were many opinions, it's okay if people disagree. We don't expect that everyone will want the exact same things. And so in our community visioning report, we will outline what the general themes were that we picked up and these nuances that people let us know about. And so for the community visioning report, excuse me, we will attach that to the request for the proposals for applicants. And here's a little bit more information about what we look at with that request for proposal, where we are defining goals and guidelines in order to get some good proposals to come in. Once we do have those come in, we're looking for and do a good job of addressing the themes that they read about from that report. We're also going to be looking at residential and non-residential program. And here is where feedback about Bergen could be especially helpful for them. We're also considering financial feasibility of the design and creativity and their experience. So just a quick recap of our milestones so that we can talk about next steps. We are at the community engagement icon here, and this is what's going to help us write the community visioning report that will get attached to the RFP, which we will then issue for developers to respond to us. It will undergo the competitive review from HPD, and we will be able to designate a developer and project. That will then go through pre-development, which would include more public review and coming back to the community board and coming back to the community in general for feedback about that project and how to make that something you would all want. And then from there, go on to ULURP certification, formal public review process. And once there's certification from that and the financing sources are in, then we will get to a construction closing so that we can start construction. And so with that, I will say thank you very much. And I am leaving up these ways for you to contact us if you would like to give us further feedback about this presentation or anything else.
Thank you, Ms. Tavares. That was very informative. We have lists and letters of the numbers of questions that have come in by email and that were copied to your office as well. And I have a question that I will say for the end of the session. I need to ask one of the particularly active committee members to monitor the chat and bring the questions forward. So if I may impose on my colleague, Gib Viconi, to do that for this meeting, I hope he accepts the challenge.
I'm happy to help in that way. Are we beginning to take questions from the chat now?
We can take questions from the chat now, or we can go back through our files on questions and letters received, however you choose to handle it.
Okay, well, since I have accepted Ms. Thomas's challenge, I'm going to use my prerogative maybe to ask the first question, and that is this RFP eligible for bids by nonprofits as well as MWBEs? And if so, are there any on the nonprofits who would be bidding?
So this RFP will be open to MWBEs as the lead developer. So as long as there's that 51% stake by the MWBE, there is potential for them to partner up with other entities, which could include a nonprofit.
Okay, that certainly would help achieve some of the low affordability goals that were indicated from the community responses. So hopefully HPD will encourage those sorts of partnership responses. There's a question in the chat that says, when would you expect construction to begin?
I see that Paris is on the line, so I'm going to ping him here for that. But I will start off saying that this is a year process, and so the RFP process normally takes 5 to 8 years from RFP issuance to construction closing. But if Paris wants to know anything more or anything specific, that would give us a little bit more.
Do you mean construction completion? You said construction closing. I think you mean construction completion, huh?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Between issuance and construction completion, and construction is usually 18 to 36 months, depending on the complexity of the site. So that can be a year and a half to 3 years.
That's right. 5 to 8 years from now was when the building should be done.
So construction.
Someone has two iterations open for their line, so you got an echo.
Sorry about that. I was just saying, so does that mean construction would start in about 3 years?
Who's speaking?
Oh, sorry. This is Daphne Eviatar who asked the question in the chat.
Yeah, it's the soonest to start. Probably not that soon. But again, that's why we give a range. But yeah, so it would start, we're saying, in 3 to 6 years.
I see. Okay, thank you.
While we're waiting for other questions in the chat, I'll ask another one, which is, you showed a slide of the process that indicated there would be the RFP award, the developer is selected, and then the ULURP process will begin after that. So are you expecting the developer to be the ULURP applicant, or will HPD or some other city agency be the ULURP applicant?
HPD is the ULURP applicant.
Okay, and how in the application in partnership with the developer? Does HPD already, I want to make sure this is clear for all the people who are listening. Does HPD, how will HPD partner with the developer coming up with the ULURP application?
I can take this one, Catherine. Good evening, everybody. This is Lynn from HPD Brooklyn Planning. So that once Catherine, she prepares the RFP, we put it out, and we get proposals in, and we select a developer. After that process is done, then we will work with the developer in working on a ULURP draft. And so So that includes, working with the developer to get an environmental study done during time application. That's also working with DCP, but we are the lead developer. I mean, the lead applicant on the ULURP application, because it has to do with the disposition of city-owned property for this project. So it's a partnership, but technically the city is the applicant. If that answers your question.
Okay. This is a question that Ethel posted, which I think is one that will be of interest to a lot of the audience. What is HPD's determining factor for determining how many dwelling units make the project financially feasible? Don't everyone talk at once. That was one of the items on your slide that discussed how you would evaluate the RFP. So how does financial feasibility get evaluated when you do receive the RFP responses?
I can take a crack at this, but Paris, if you want to chime in, let me know. So for financial feasibility, with a term sheet. And so depending on the term sheet, that's where the financial feasibility would come in. So for C, such as the SARA term sheet, which is how we do senior housing for HPD. I think we've mentioned in past meetings that there is a threshold of about 75 units, at least that number, in order to make the project feasible. This is a little different from an ELA term sheet, which could help address multifamily rentals at the low, very low, and extremely low. And so there, that works with bond financing, where there's a threshold of, I believe, 100 units feasible. So I would say that it depends on the term sheet.
And since you mentioned the ELA term sheet, I'd like to ask if, just follow up with, would a developer responding to the RFP looking for ELA financing be required to propose 100 units? ELA is available at less than 100 units at a discretionary basis. So would developers still be able to request ELA financing if they were offering less than 100 units?
Yeah, that they don't have that. It's just a kind of a best guide or best practice based on tax credit financing and our own subsidies we put there. But yeah, we've made ELA's work with less than 100 units.
Hey, I had a question.
Is it in the chat?
Yeah, it is in the chat. I had a question about whether or not it sort of has to do with financial feasibility, whether or not this would be exempt from parking minimums, because if it was subject to parking minimums, there would be fewer units of affordable housing, and it would negatively impact the ability to house low-income people, which we need as a city.
So fortunately for you, I was about to ask that question, but let me please moderate the chat as Ethel has asked. But if HPD could go ahead and answer that with respect to parking, that would be great.
There is no parking required here for residents. So on the SARA term sheet, there is no parking required for senior units. And for other term sheets, again, the Bergen state is now open to different term sheets, and I won't go through each one one by one. The lower income bands, Paris or Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe.
That's correct, because this site is, as you guys know, it's in a transit zone. It's not very far from the Atlantic subway stop. So per zoning, if we're offering kind of the 80% AMI find working. But the rules for home ownership is a little different. So, I think it depends on what the proposal is, and we have to evaluate all of that. So, if we get a proposal for home ownership from one of the sites, and people are, we have to see how the finances and that proposal look like. So it's all sort of part of a full package. But definitely agree on, if we provide parking, that would be more money and obviously impact the finances of the project.
Thanks for answering.
We have a question from Jessica Katz, which is, what is the typical income range for a senior apartment under the SARA program?
Yeah, so here for SARA projects, the AMIs are 0 to 50% AMI. And going off the top of my head for what that means income wise, it's $0 over to a little under $50,000, since the 100% AMI for New York City is a little over $100,000.
But for a family of three,
Family of four, yeah, or family of three.
Yeah, so
100,000
most senior households are either one or two. So I think it's more like 30 something or maybe 40,000 at 50% AMI for a household of one or two.
I'm going to paraphrase questions that are being asked in the chat, which relate to HPD's desire to have parking at the site, and whether or not that will conflict with the ability to offer deeper affordability, since some of the lot area will be taken up with parking and storage for HPD. Couldn't the affordability be improved without that in the project?
You're saying it's a question of units or afford? I don't understand.
Well, the idea is if you're looking for floor area for parking and storage for HPD, that's floor area that can't be used for affordable housing, and so it makes it burdens the rest of the project basically with the parking for HPD and the storage.
Got it. Yeah, we 100% agree. We're still hopeful. As I was just saying this, I think that was Monday. I can't keep days straight anymore. But anyway, whenever the North Prospect Heights Association, this concern came up, and yeah, we would love not to have those uses there, and to relocate, the storage and parking to another city-owned site somewhere else in the neighborhood. But we don't have another location, so at present we have to use this location as a replacement location.
There's just follow-up question on the parking. How many cars are envisioned for the parking on the Bergen lot?
Catherine, do we have a specific number, or is it just a square footage that we got from our colleagues in terms of the number of vehicles and what they need?
We have a range, and it's not final.
And just to round out the discussion on parking, Richard's made a good point here, which is whether HPD will provide additional subsidies to compensate for the parking, or is the developer taking that on as an obligation?
We'll have to put in more money to make up the difference, unfortunately. Which is another reason why we don't want it there.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bocconi, that goes to the second part of my old question, working my way down the list from the top. We have some other questions after mine that haven't been answered. Also, I just want to say, Mr. Straughter made an attempt to answer my question, which is how much flexibility is there in shifting a larger portion of the financial responsibility to the developer, and to help me in seeing what you see HPD is to get your responses in terms of percentages of financial responsibility. Back to you, Gib.
There's a question from Regina Cahill. I think this applies to the Dean Street site. Will the streetscape include a lay-by lane to ensure that buses, bike lane, and seniors are safe on the sidewalk? I don't think, I think that doesn't mean buses are going to go on the sidewalk, but I think the idea is, will there be a lay-by lanes for drop-offs at the Dean Street building?
Actually,
Oh.
Gib, both sites would need it, because if you have the HPD vehicles, that could be a problem.
Okay, fair enough.
The question is if there'd be a carve out, I'm not exactly sure what.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lay-by lane, which is an additional lane basically in the sidewalk for.
So people could pull over because you have buses, bike lane, city vehicles from the police and fire.
Yeah, both of those streets do have bike lanes.
Usually that'd be accommodated by a loading zone.
That won't work because you right now you have parking on both sides and the bus. You need to create a space that would make it safe for the residents of both buildings.
Would it be possible to remove parking from one side of the street, at least where the housing will be?
Not unless you can enforce with the police to not park there.
Yeah, the police love doing that.
That's a major concession that needs to be given back to the community. If you're going to do anything, that has to be addressed.
Yeah, it's not something that we would normally do, nor is it something I think even would be allowed by zoning. But we're happy to take a look at it. It would have an impact on the units achievable at the site and financial feasibility.
But it would have an adverse effect in the other direction for safety of the people, the very people you're moving in.
Yeah, I think the concern there is contention for the street space on both of those streets, and if we're creating something where cars are going to be pulling up to those buildings frequently, it'll be adding to something that's already a somewhat chaotic situation on those streets. It's really a safety issue.
But we should also mention the 800 middle schoolers that will be in residence very soon too.
Yeah, frankly, I'm not aware of a precedent anywhere else in New York City for this, so that's why I'm struggling a little bit. But
well, we'd like to create a precedent at least. I think would be helpful.
I guess we need to push Department of Transportation on that.
Gib, I see some questions going back to 6:45. It's now 7 o'clock on air quality, air rights, a zoning presumption. So I'd like to get that out there and see what HPD.
Yeah, so let's talk about about air quality and how that would play out with respect to the ULIP application, which is where I suppose this would be considered. Can HPD, or I don't know if there's anyone from city planning here, but can you speak to how air quality will be considered as part of the ULIP?
Well, as part of the ULURP application, in order to even certify the ULURP, an environmental study would have to be done to see what that impact is. So, so that would definitely happen. To monitor that. And if this has kind of will be done on the site as well to make sure that gets cleaned up and all of that. So I don't know if that answers the question on air quality.
Maybe, but to the kinds of things that go into an air quality review for an EAS or an EIS.
I'm not the expert in the environmental planning side, so I think we probably should look into it before, unless there is somebody from city planning who could speak to that. But we could definitely look into how that gets monitored. But if the proposed project does pose an air quality impact, I imagine that would definitely get studied. But we could definitely look into that question and get back to the group.
I see a question from Dan T, who says, if an impact study has to be done on the air quality, will it be done before contractors begin proposals? And the answer to that, I suspect, is no, because you wouldn't be able to do the environmental assessment until a ULURP application had at least been prepared.
That's correct. You need to have a project and you need to have a scope of the project to know what the impact is.
I see that Spencer has typed several times a question that I think must be very important to him, which is how much soft costs are incurred by these meetings? The meetings cost money, and I worry that they just delay the project and inflate the soft costs on the pro forma. So the question is the developer somehow responsible for the costs of running these meetings?
Do you mean these meetings, the meetings we're having tonight and the ones that we've had previously?
I think the question applies to all of the meetings that have been conducted by HPD up to this point.
I don't know, Paris, if you want to jump in on. I mean, this is staff time. This is part of our job as planners working at HPD, is preparing for these meetings, and then and trying to answer people's questions. But I'm not, I'm quantify the soft costs and to developer.
Yeah, I mean, once a developer is on board and they have their consultants and attending meetings like these is part of the process, a very important part of the process. The way that ends up getting billed to the project or project costs, which of course the developer shares in, well, depending on what kind of program it is, there might not be any developer equity in it. It might just be all subsidy. But those soft costs are take into account everything. So not just kind of attendance of meetings, but the more time that things take up is like architectural drawings and making sure to coordinate to get proper permits. There's a lot of steps in the pre-development process to get from basically an idea of a building to an actual approved construction drawings. It's a significant amount of work that engineers do, architects, and of course people that work for the development team, and all those people have to provide for their families, of course. So but those costs are just part of the capital project, and it ends up being, and I don't know off the top of my head, but it ends up being a percentage of the construction cost is what you end up seeing. Otherwise, soft costs generally are some X percent, and I just can't remember what it is, of the total development cost of a building. And those costs are high in New York. They're higher than in some other cities because we do have more process. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that, it's good that we have a robust community process and that people have multiple opportunities to have input in that process.
But just to be clear, HPD isn't billing the developer back for its time spent in meetings, is it?
We wish. We wish.
I would
have more staff if we could.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to make sure we were clear on that one. There's a question here about other projects you may have done that are similar to this with respect to having some ground floor non-residential use, like a cafe or some kind of retail on a one-lane street where presumably the business will have to get deliveries and pickups and the like. Have you done something like that on a one-way street with a senior housing project that has a bus route and a bike lane? Does this sound like anything you guys have done before?
That's very specific. We don't have our team from programs here who are the experts on para programs, but we can, unless anybody wants to chime in, we can get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very specific sort of example, and can't think of one on top of my head, but we definitely have multiple mixed use projects on our sites with ground floor, community facility or retail. So we'll look for some examples if there are any, and then kind of so people can take a look at that.
I'm going to go to a question here from Michael Rogers, and this has been echoed by some other participants I've seen in the chat, talking about, sorry, sometimes this is a little bit tricky to try to keep up with this. The way the chat works isn't always all that easy for me to control. Is there a concern, or how would HPD address the concern about displacement, secondary displacement, that could occur as a function of these projects? I mean, this is something I would expect that HPD understands a lot about, given its role in affordable housing in New York City. What type of programs do you have that provide anti-displacement sorts of services in these situations?
Yeah, I'm just not aware. This question came up. I think it was Monday. We had that meeting, and I'm just not aware of examples where our projects, cause an impact on property values or rents that would basically lead to displacement risk. Certainly, area-wide rezonings could have that effect, and I think that's obvious to everyone, and that's something that's analyzed as part of the EAS. If our projects are big enough, we have to analyze that thing too via the environmental, either an impact statement or if it's EAS. But displacement is not something I'm aware of. And I don't think that it would come here because we're talking about, two buildings. Certainly there's an improvement to maybe the existing condition that we're ushering in by developing these buildings. But we're talking about bringing, a low-income senior building and, probably a low to moderate income family building and, not a ton of units, in an area that already has, extremely high rents, and in an area that is seeing, thousands of units of luxury housing being built. So I just don't see how these two projects would ever create any displacement risk.
So Paris, I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't think senior housing and deeply affordable housing pose much of a risk of displacement, but we are talking about something that could include a larger rezoning area. And as you mentioned, larger rezonings potentially do cause displacement. And here I'll note that there's been a lot of political pressure and public pressure on the city to study secondary displacement as a part of an EAS or an EIS, where the city has taken the position in the past that, for instance, rent stabilized tenants aren't at risk of displacement because they're rent stabilized. Whereas the reality is we know they are, in fact, at risk of displacement, even if they're rent stabilized. So I think the question here, maybe we could talk about that in terms of the way this project plays out, given that it's possible a larger rezoning area will be proposed. What type of mitigation might accompany that to prevent secondary displacement or to limit it?
Well, I mean, I think even if the rezoning is larger than just these two sites, I don't think that the intention of the rezoning will be to trigger redevelopment. And if it's not triggering redevelopment, then it's not going to have that impact. So I don't know, it feels preliminary to have that kind of conversation, given that I just don't see that there'd be an impact. But certainly, we do have tools at the city's disposal around anti-displacement, and we both have kind of housing preservation efforts where we've tried to be more aggressive in certain neighborhoods about getting existing buildings into our preservation programs. And then we have efforts where we've gone out to do more outreach in terms of making sure that tenants know their rights, because that's one of the biggest gaps. These landlords are doing stuff that's illegal oftentimes, but tenants don't know that it's illegal. So it's really important to educate tenants, even educate property owners, because sometimes property owners don't even really necessarily understand the law, although I'm sure plenty of them do and still deliberately break it. So there are things that we can do, and we've done before around some of these other rezonings. But yeah, I just don't see that's not the intention here, to do a larger rezoning. But we do have tools, and we can discuss that, I think, when there's an actual proposal around a proposed zoning district.
So potentially there might be some programs, educational programs, maybe other kinds of outreach programs that HPD would be able to provide that would address secondary displacement in the context of a larger rezoning.
Yeah, and actually, I think, Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we had talked about bringing that idea, maybe even tonight. There's stuff that we kind of regularly do, and I think we were checking to see the last time we had done anything in CB8, and it's been a while, if I remember right. So yeah, there's landlord fairs, tenant fairs that we do. That's basically bringing, and now we do them virtually, but it's a resource fair where we connect tenants to the broad array of resources that the city has currently, just to make sure that those resources are known to folks. We can kind of always do that, but we try to, because we have limited staff, we try to target our efforts either based on people are requesting them, or when we do have a project that's coming and we're already out there in the community, it makes sense to kind of offer that. So that's something we can do, even well before this, these projects go into ULERP.
And I would expect that you partner with local organizations to help deliver those types of services.
That's right.
So for folks on the call who are interested in that problem, it sounds like there is a way for you to follow up with HPD to talk about anti-displacement here.
Yeah, I just did want to confirm that we do have somebody from our team who will be reaching out to the community board to schedule an event like that.
That's great. Good to hear. I would say there are organizations in Prospect Heights that do those kinds of events as well, and I think they'd probably be happy to have HPD's participation as well. This is an area where we're very concerned about pressure on rent stabilized tenants, and we've had tremendous displacement over the last 10 years here, as we heard Monday night in a presentation that DCP provided.
Okay, so given that HPD has met with other residents of Prospect Heights earlier this week, and the survey site is still open, I'm not seeing any issue areas that haven't been addressed. Do you see anything that we need to cover, Gib?
No, I think I think we've gotten a pretty good coverage here, and a lot of people have asked the same sort of questions, and I think most of them have been addressed. Although somebody has just posted a question about a link to the survey site, and I think that would be great if someone from HPD could type the link for the survey into the chat. I think that would be very helpful. We've got one other question here. I'm going to read. It's kind of lengthy. HPD is sorry. Every time I start to read a question, my chat flies away from me here. So bear with me. HPD has said they will. No, did it again. Hey guys, how about you just let me read this question before chatting away too much more? HPD has said they will not define zoning in the RFP for these mid-block sites, leaving the zoning to be determined by the proposals that are submitted. You did it to me again. Among other things, this leaves the area vulnerable to changes to property ownership and air right purchases that may change the parameters of the sites and air right purchases that may change the parameters of the sites and or their associated zoning districts. Will HPD commit to not accepting proposals which apply the following? Please reply to each individually. 1, extended zoning districts. 2, air rights from properties nearby. 3, expanded building sites, unless the developer commits to using existing R6B zoning, and R7A zoning.
Yeah, sure. So, the RFP will ask for developers to propose a development program, otherwise a building of a certain height, scale, kind of exact dimensions, etc. And also the ground floor program, and as well as a zoning district that enables that. So we will be asking for that. We will not be asking for a zoning strategy that looks at sites. So we will ask them to, to propose, hey, what zoning district does this work under? But we will not be asking them to propose a wild zoning strategy beyond those 2 sites. And, my expectation is that we might get even different zoning strategies for each of the 2 sites, because that's not what we're going to be focused on. It's really, we're going to be focused on the development program. How tall is the building? What does it look like? How many units? How are they allocating open space? How responsive were they to the community as it relates to design, as it relates to the commercial community facility and commercial uses they might be proposing in the building, and all the other kind of competitive criteria that we mentioned earlier. So developers won't be coming to us with a zoning strategy that would include anything about other sites or adjacent sites.
We have a question from Janet Clancy. Where can we find information about other similar size HPD developments that we can visit and speak to the residents and neighbors about the success or not of the project? Does HPD compile reviews of this type?
Great question. We have a lot of information on our website on projects we've done across the city. But more specifically, you can find out where we've built and where our buildings are. But in terms of kind of into area residents, I don't know that we've done kind of surveys before, but we can kind of do some research to find out. HPD has actually a research division. It's very small, but they do studies from time to time, and I know that they've looked at the impact on our residential projects, at least on certain households. So they might have some of this. They might have some information in that regard in terms of what you're asking about, and certainly you can look at some of those projects and feel free to reach out to neighbors, that are near those buildings.
In fact, I believe that there was a recent HPD project on Washington Avenue. I want to say it might be between might be between either Sterling and St. John and Lincoln. It was not new construction, but it was a renovated building that was done maybe within the last couple of years. Does that ring a bell? That's the only other building that I know of in this Prospect Heights that's run by HPD, but maybe there are others.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of prominent ones in the neighborhood. Sorry for cutting you off, Paris, but that comes to mind. Near BAM, there is the two buildings on both sides of Tafana, a theater for a new audience. So those were actually HPD finance projects on city-owned land. And so those are examples of, and there's a range of, our projects, but those two were selected through an RFP, through RFPs as well.
And I can drop a link into the chat of our HPD featured projects to help people get started on their search.
Great.
Let me insert a question before we start to prepare to close out. For the mayor's management reports for fiscal year 20, will your parameters that most of the community members are concerned with on these two projects, do you use those types of parameters in your reports to the mayor's office, OMB's management reports?
I'm not familiar with what those reports are. What
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I think we're probably looking at construction cost per foot, all of the other things that have popped up in the chat this evening, the costs that go into getting this kind of work done, including the soft costs, the staff salaries.
These are kind of like government efficiency reports. Yeah, it wouldn't be us that there is, within our agency as well as within the city, I think it's housed in OMB. There's basically kind of a performance evaluation or performance management function to make sure that we are spending money wisely, spending tax, this is taxpayer money. So yeah, those functions exist, but in planning, we don't touch those processes. My understanding is they're usually auditing completed projects. Those folks. So I'm not familiar with what that you're referencing, but if you're talking about kind of that kind of performance management function to make sure that the city is getting what it was supposed to get and at a cost that it agreed to and that's reasonable, that happens later, and it's our colleagues. But we're happy to get more information on that for you guys.
Thank you. Okay, unless there's something we haven't covered, I'm going to suggest that we work behind the scenes over the next day or two to set up a meeting in January to have that third meeting that Catherine asked me about by email the other day. And I'd have to work in conjunction with District Manager George and Catherine to set that meeting date for sometime in January, probably be the third week in January, for us to have another meeting on the project and we brought another report back further up to date. Is that okay?
Yes, that was when I wanted to clarify too, that it would be for our final findings and the information that would be going into the community visioning report. That would be the purpose of that meeting in January.
Okay, so we're going to pick a date in the third week of January. We can do that offline.
Yeah, sorry, I had a lot of trouble moving. Yes.
Yeah, the chat is going to advance up the screen as people add their questions. Gib, are there questions we've missed?
No, I don't see questions we've missed.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to cover before we close the meeting?
Can I say? Can you answer Leslie Dan's last question, Mrs. Kathy Islam?
What is the question, Kathy?
Well, I think Leslie could ask it or Gib could read it for us if Gib is moderating.
Leslie
I'm
asked
just
the
saying
question.
that, sorry.
Go ahead, Leslie.
I'm just saying that North Prospect Heights Association sent several questions ahead of this meeting and been posting them in the chat, and they haven't all been answered. So since there are several, maybe you can find a time later offline to send us the answers. I misunderstood. I thought this meeting was a 2-hour meeting.
Oh, no, we try to keep it as short as possible. Do you have your list with you? You want to read off the top 3 questions?
I think that Peter would have to be in charge of that.
Okay, Peter, time's ticking.
Well, I thought we forwarded these to you yesterday. And
Peter, I know. Do you have the questions that you want to read?
Sure.
Them off?
Here's one.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. The North Prospect Heights area is being described as a high amenity area, and yet due to already approved developments, studies show significant shortfalls in elementary school seats, open seat space for the community, as well as even intersection delays of as much as 11 minutes at certain times of the day and week. That's actually the Dean Carlton intersection right down the street from the Dean Street site. So what specific rubrics does the city use to define a neighborhood as rich in amenities? And will DCP and the city work transparently with the community to coordinate information on what is known in relation to city and state's projects so that city agency planning and decision-making improves the neighborhood instead of magnifying anticipatable problems moving forward? This is really important because, you see a lot of comments even in chat, which are assuming that this is a neighborhood that is rich in amenities and doesn't have a lot of shortfalls or problems that are going to unfold. Even the surveys themselves that you sent out were sent out in the context of a neighborhood that's changing very rapidly. Just using one small example, you've got in the survey, a question, suggest people putting in information about a dog run or asking for a dog run when there's a dog run that will be built just down the block. So they just don't know it because the information is not evenly shared between city agencies, state agencies, and the community. It's only a very few sorts of people who track all these things that are able to actually share this, but we're just not allowed to participate in this process enough. So again, what are the specific rubrics the city uses to define a neighborhood as rich in amenities?
Yeah, sure. And there's more information on this in Where We Live NYC, which we can drop a link to that report in the chat. Just the kind of way we define and think about these things. But yeah, it's not just it's not just about school seats. It's about school quality. It's about access to transit. It's about access to jobs in terms of commute time, for instance. It's about access to healthy food, which is a major problem in low-income communities, and most of those communities are where HPD does the lion's share of our work because of both kind of land values. It's more affordable to build affordable housing in those areas, and because historically we just have more city-owned land in those areas. What did I say? Access to jobs, transit, fresh, healthy food. It's also kind of commercial and other commercial amenities and just retail. So I would point people to that report as a way to that. And these things are evolving too, in that these conversations, the Where We Live report and our kind of fair housing approach is not stopped there. It's an evolving conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Straughter. Next question, Mr. Crassus. Two more to go, okay, and then we're going to close. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say again that this is an evolving neighborhood in which what is going to unfold here is very different than what's going to even Prospect Heights is going to look like 3 blocks away. Will DCP and the city work transparently with the community to coordinate information on what is known in relation to state and city projects so the city agency planning and decision-making improves the neighborhood instead of magnifying anticipatable problems moving forward? So this just goes to the broader question of whether, when we're taking all of this development and putting into the same immediate area, 6,430 units of housing in a state project, these new projects. So how does this, and DCP may not be on this call, but how is the community board and HPD and DCP, DOT, are you all ready to commit to actually working on these issues in a transparent way, identifying what they are, coordinating between city and state in terms of information so that we don't keep getting all these issues that are unresolved?
Yeah, certainly.
I'm sorry, Mr. Straughter. Peter, can you just succinctly recap what your question is, because you lost me?
Will DCP and the city work transparently with the community to coordinate information on what is known in relation to state and city projects so that city agency planning and decision-making improves the neighborhood instead of magnifying anticipatable problems moving forward, as was submitted to you in writing yesterday, Ethel?
Thank you, Peter. Sounds like Euler. Go ahead, Mr. Straughter.
City government, particularly in New York, it's a behemoth. It's a gigantic bureaucracy. So, I'm not going to say that, we're not uncoordinated at times, in our efforts across agencies and certain locations, et cetera. And that's one reason why the community board is so important, because it gives an official kind of venue for community members to hold agencies and politicians accountable. Beyond just outreach to elected officials. So I'm sure there's work to be done as it relates to these projects, as kind of Ethel just hinted. That's we have to be coordinated as we go into ULURP for these projects. So we have to be coordinated with DOT around any transportation impacts. We have to be coordinated with other agencies, certainly DCP. Whether or not there's a rezoning proposed, we have to be coordinated because DCP runs that process. So, as part of the process to get these projects through, we will have to be coordinated. And to the extent that we can do a better job of coordinating information delivery with the community, we're all about that. But I understand that sometimes that hasn't happened before. And, that's something that we do appreciate you guys holding us accountable for.
So ULURP, and we're not really, our experience with ULURP is very different, and it doesn't actually solve issues at all. Actually, what I think would be most appropriate, Ethel, actually, instead of me speaking, is if we could ask if there's any rent stabilized tenants on the block of Dean Street to speak instead. Because I don't really think that what's been said about the imminent or the potential displacement of rent stabilized tenants is not satisfying to know that there's education that they can have to help protect their position. So can we just see if there's any rent stabilized tenants on the call who might want to speak? I can't force anybody to speak, but
I'm just a little bit confused, since there aren't any buildings being demolished for this, how anyone would get displaced. And just because I'm rent stabilized, I'm not on that block, but I am rent stabilized, and I know I have legal rights. So, I mean, that question just kind of seems like a little bit of a red herring.
Thank you.
No, I can. Well, so let me try to explain.
Peter, I asked you to pick 3 questions from the letter that you sent. You've done 2. Could you pick one more, and then we'll get an answer from the team at HPD. And they have your letter. You copied them, and I would expect that they will be responding to everybody you copied on your letter.
Sure.
Okay,
so Ethel, here's my third question.
I'm sorry, Peter. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get a statement out. One more question from your letter.
What are the views of the people who live in rent stabilized apartments that are adjacent or nearby the sites to HPD's proposal? This was in writing submitted to you yesterday.
Their views regarding whether or not this project will displace them, or just, do they like the weather that day? What do you mean? What are their views?
We're actually is part of what we have. I'm asking actually if this this is asking if the community report contain the views of the rent stabilized tenants, and because I think that they are more at risk than other people who are on this call.
Okay, I'm not sure that you understand how rent stabilization works. They have to be offered a renewal
I
lease.
think we know how
They must be offered a renewal lease, Mr. Crassus. So
we know
the
how
educational part of helping rent stabilized tenants is up to us as community board members to make sure that they have this information. But I do recall you saying you didn't want to be a community board member, you just want.
you. There, am I unmuted?
Okay, so, all right, so if that's your last question, I see
These
comments coming up
these are
in the
mid-block
chat.
developments that HPD and DCP have stated that this may have been extended, that these will likely have extended zoning districts. The precedent set for mid-block rezoning or in this immediate area with other large projects nearby does suggest that further rezonings are coming forward and may even be initiated by private property owners who are nearby or adjacent. In addition, these sites are likely to, they're adjacent to or near non-compliant buildings that can be connected into larger extended districts, also putting rent stabilized tenants at risk. We're very familiar, as Mr. Vicconi said, with the procedures that landlords use between carrots and sticks to get people out. And whether you have people on this call who have had this exact experience on this block near and even adjacent to the HPD site. So I asked, and North Prospect Heights Association asked if you have, and these are very difficult in the context of virtual meetings, have you got input specifically from the rent stabilized tenants on these blocks? And is up somewhere between 35 and 50 units on Dean between Carlton and 6th Avenue.
Mr. Strada, if you can answer that, it's fine. I don't think many members of the audience, especially the questioner, understands the privacy issues that are involved in that question. Please try to do your best to give an answer so we can move on. Thank you.
Yeah, doing outreach for anything is difficult. Getting responses from folks. It's particularly hard now, given our new environment. And we're hoping it's a temporary thing until there's vaccine for everyone. We have been working with the community board, and we thank you for your support on this, as well as other organizations to try to get out the word to folks. But there's no guarantee in terms of who we reach. So, but we've extended the time that we're collecting surveys. We've reached out to other organizations, to the borough president's office, to try to get more folks out in terms of get more responses on those surveys and get people out to these. So, but we're happy to, if anyone has an idea on how to reach people, we're open to it. And I think word of mouth is very important. So although there's some confidentiality issues in terms of how we approach the population that you talked about, rent stabilized tenants, if folks know people in buildings like that, and some of the organizations that we're working with do, then tell your neighbors, tell your friends, ask them to come to the next meeting when we come back at at the end of January, or to respond to the survey online. And if they have problems accessing the internet or a computer, we can help with that. They can. There's I don't know if we have a phone number that we've provided as part of this, but we can connect people by phone and get. We have hard copy surveys too, right, Catherine?
Yeah, that's right. And I'll drop the phone number into the chat.
Are there any potential tenants?
I'm sorry, Spencer. I'm sorry, Spencer. I'm trying to close this meeting. We have two representatives here from our elected officials, Mr. Barak from Brooklyn Borough President, and Lucian Allen from Council Member Majority Leader Cumbo's office. I'd like to hear from those two people Mr. Barak first, before we close the meeting. Mr. Barak, would you like to make a statement?
No, I'm just glad to be able to listen to the dialogue and hear what people are concerned about, and glad HPD has been able to provide responses. And so it's been a good dialogue. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Barak. Mr. Allen, do you have anything, questions or comments you want to make?
Good evening. No questions or comments at the moment. Just again here getting as much information as possible in regards to what is going to be developed and the feelings of the community at large. So I guess definitely we've been in contact clearly. So we continue those lines of communication so we can make sure that majority leader is up to date with everything, and yeah, the development does obviously serve as many people as it is intended to.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. As I understand it, Majority Leader Cumbo is supportive of senior citizens housing across the borough, and
Yes,
I'm with her
very.
on that one. Let me ask if there are any other representatives for our elected officials on the line who want to make a statement.
Hi, it's Kim Robinson from Councilmember Samuel's office. I don't want to make a statement, but it was just very informative. And thank you, HPD, for being available to answer some of the questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Spencer, I had my mic closed. I hope.
Yeah, I wanted to see if there are any future tenants of the building possibly on the call, so we can hear from them.
Say again?
Are there any possible future tenants of the development on the call?
I just want to say it's anybody who has the income range in the neighborhood can apply when this happened, when there's a lottery roughly 6 years out in the future. So anybody who has that income range can be a potential future resident.
Okay, is there anyone on the call who would qualify and would apply for this type of housing?
You'd have to look at your income, your household size, and match it up with the HPD term sheets to see what AMIs. And obviously on the senior, you know, if you're not of a certain age, 55 or older, you wouldn't have a chance to apply for the senior unit. But for the other, again, there's income bands. So like if you earn within a couple of $1,000s of that income band, where you wouldn't be paying more than 30% of your income for the rent, you would be an eligible lottery person. So if you're in that mode now, rather than limiting yourself to these two buildings, you should go on Housing Connect website and register and start trying to see just that when you live in District 8, sites in District 8 have a 50% local preference. So this is an opportunity for people who are rent pressured right now to try to get into these sites. There's one.
I guess my point is most of the people on this call are housing secure, and there's very few people who are represented that really need this type of housing. So I think although they're not on the call, we should keep them in mind and we should keep their opinions in mind.
Spencer, thank you very much. Do you live in the district?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to remind people that the community board is confined in its inquiries by privacy laws that apply on all three levels. So Spencer, I think that the questions that you're offering, people may not be willing to respond to everyone. They may not even be able to respond to you because they don't know you, and the questions that you're asking have a high degree of privacy concerned with accurate responses. So I don't know how you get at that.
Fair.
Okay, so Gib, I don't know if you're looking in the chat, but I don't see much else that we can cover tonight.
I think that we're going over stuff that has already been brought up, but for the most part, there was there was some confusion there. There may be some confusion, I think, about the type of housing that's being requested by this RFP. I thing is, and I think HPD can confirm that all housing requested by this RFP is affordable housing and subsidized. There is no market rate housing that is included in this project in either the Dean Street or the Bergen Street site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Lenzing and Gib, for focusing. I think HPD mentioned earlier that the trade-off here is that the winning respondent will have dominion and control over the property for a term of years, an extended term of years, in order for them to recoup their investment, where they're putting up the brick and mortar money and the city's putting up the land. And so that land value is covering what would ordinarily, which might turn into costs for homeless shelters. So here we are. We've done a lot this evening. I thank you all for coming. And at this point, I'm going to look to hear from Catherine Taveras either tomorrow or Monday with a date for us to meet again in late January after the holidays. And I wish you all a very, very happy holiday season. Maybe a little bit more snow to keep us all from getting infected by others. And see you all next year. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And good night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
Thank you. Thanks.